The air in that old cabin smelled like damp earth and forgotten dreams. My hands, usually turning delicate book pages, were shaking, stained black with soot from my worthless inheritance. But then, beneath a loose floorboard, a secret glimmered, a vein of copper, rich and warm, radiating a soft, dark gold. My breath caught as I touched the cold metal. That's when I heard the crunch of heavy boots outside. Barnaby Thorne's shadow, already reaching for my hidden prize. Before I continue, drop a comment telling me where you're listening to this from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. You won't want to miss the ending. My hands, the ones that knew the smooth whisper of turning pages, felt rough and alien now, perpetually stained with something that felt like defeat. It wasn't just dirt. It was the ash of everything I used to know. My little apartment. Those comfortable, soft cardigans I loved. Even the quiet joy of recommending a good mystery to a regular. All gone. My grandfather, the one I hadn't seen in 20 years, had left me something. All right. Not money, no. Just a burnt-out timber claim up in the Sierra Nevada mountains. A worthless piece of land, according to the bank. A burden, according to my dwindling savings account, which was almost as empty as my stomach. The bus coughed and wheezed its way up the winding mountain road, rattling my bones and my last few pennies in my pocket. The landscape outside, once green and alive, turned into a ghostly mosaic of black sticks and skeletal trees reaching up to a sky that felt too big, too indifferent. My stomach growled. A hollow, sad sound. And I hugged my threadbare coat tighter, wishing for a warm cup of tea and a quiet corner, instead of this cold, desolate journey. The chill in the air bit at my cheeks, making them ache. I was 52 years old, a librarian, not an adventurer. My idea of a tough day was reorganizing the Dewey Decimal System after a particularly rambunctious children's story time. Now, here I was, headed for a place that looked like the end of the world, carrying a suitcase full of clothes that weren't quite warm enough, and a heart full of fear. I barely knew which end of a hammer was which, let alone how to survive out here. My soft hands, used to paper and keyboards, felt utterly useless. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still hear the receiver clattering as the bank manager told me I was broke. Utterly. Completely, irrevocably broke. The only thing I owned was this land, this charred scar on the mountain, miles from anything resembling civilization. A man named Barnaby Thorne had called me, more times than I could count, his voice thick with a fake kindness that felt like sandpaper. He wanted to buy the claim, kept saying it was a fire hazard, nothing more, a nuisance, not worth the trouble. But his persistence was a tiny, nagging worry, a fly buzzing around the edges of my despair, a feeling that he knew something I didn't. The bus finally pulled over, hissing its brakes. The driver, a kind man with a grizzled beard, pointed a calloused thumb towards a barely visible track disappearing into the burnt forest. "That's about as close as I can get you, ma'am," he said, his voice soft, almost apologetic. "Good luck out there." Good luck. I needed more than luck. I needed a miracle. The air smelled of cold ash and damp earth, a smell that clung to my clothes and hair as soon as I stepped off the bus. My shoes crunched on fallen pine needles, black and brittle. The silence was deafening, broken only by the mournful sigh of the wind through the skeletal branches. I gripped the handle of my worn suitcase, my knuckles white, and started walking down that track, each step feeling heavier than the last. The sun was already dipping below the jagged peaks, casting long, eerie shadows that danced like ghosts. I kept telling myself, just make it to whatever shelter there is. But the truth was, I had no idea what lay ahead. I just knew I couldn't go back, and the forward path looked terrifyingly bleak. Then, through the gloom, I saw it. A small, sad huddle of blackened timbers, barely standing. The roof sagged like it had given up on life, too. My grandfather's cabin. My new home, or perhaps my tomb. As I got closer, a gust of wind kicked up a swirl of ash, stinging my eyes, and I tasted the grit of despair on my tongue. I was here, finally, and utterly alone, standing before a cabin that looked like it might crumble at the slightest touch of the wind, and the night was already swallowing the last sliver of light. The cabin groaned around me as I pushed the door open, the wood scraping a mournful tune against the dirt floor. A thick cloud of dust, disturbed by my entrance, danced in the fading light. It smelled like damp earth, forgotten fires, and a lifetime of secrets. My breath caught in my throat, not from the dust, but from the sheer emptiness of it all. This was it. My inheritance. My new beginning. It felt more like an ending. My shoes crunched on bits of shattered glass and dried leaves that had blown in through cracks in the walls. The roof sagged precariously overhead, looking like a tired old hat. My first thought was just finding a dry spot, a place to curl up out of the biting mountain air. My suitcase thudded softly as I dropped it, sending up another puff of fine gray ash. I ran my fingers over a rough, blackened timber, feeling the splintery texture, the cold, hard reality of it all. I felt a tear prick the corner of my eye, but I blinked it away. No time for that. I stumbled across the uneven floor, my foot catching on something hidden beneath a thin layer of grime and old newspapers. It wasn't a loose board exactly, but one that shifted with a soft thud, a little different from the others. My librarian's curiosity? A quiet, insistent thing, stirred within me. I knelt down, wincing as my stiff knees protested, and brushed away the dust. The wood felt different here, softer, almost springy. I tugged at the edge, using my fingernails, and to my surprise, it gave way. The board wasn't nailed down at all. It was just sitting there, cleverly disguised. Beneath it, it was dark, a small square opening. I reached in, feeling around blindly, my fingers brushing against cold, rusted metal. Old pans, broken tools, just junk, I thought, a sigh escaping my lips. But then, my fingertips found something else, a hollow space. My heart began to pound a little, a quick tap-tap against my ribs. I shone my tiny keychain flashlight down, and my breath hitched. It wasn't just a hole. It was a narrow, hand-dug shaft, disappearing into the earth. The air that wafted up from it was damp and smelled of deep, cool rock. Fear warred with a strange, compelling pull. My grandfather, the stranger who had left me this burnt-out wasteland, had built this cabin. What had he been hiding? My hands, still trembling, found purchase on some crude wooden rungs hammered into the side of the shaft. They felt surprisingly sturdy. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I started to lower myself down, my feet scrabbling for purchase, dust showering my face. Each rung felt colder than the last, and the darkness seemed to swallow the meager beam of my flashlight. A few feet down, the shaft widened slightly, opening into a small, damp cavern. The air was thick with a silence I'd never known, a heavy, ancient quiet that pressed in on my ears. I slowly panned my light across the rough-hewn walls, and that's when I saw it, not gleaming like treasure in a storybook, but alive in its own way. A glorious vein of copper running through the rock like a forgotten river. It shimmered with dull, earthy reds and browns, almost a dark gold, radiating a silent promise in the gloom. I reached out a tentative finger, touching the cool, solid metal. It felt real, so real. Tucked into a dry alcove near the vein, almost as if waiting for me, was a sturdy, leather-bound journal. Its pages, brittle and yellowed, were filled with looping, faded script, my grandfather's handwriting. My eyes scanned the words, recognizing a few, words like pure and vain and sleeping bear. But then, a chilling phrase jumped out. Unstable sections near the entrance. A shiver ran down my spine, but it wasn't from the cold. I quickly shut the journal, clutching it to my chest like a lifeline, a secret too precious and too dangerous to share. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this was why Barnaby Thorne had been so insistent about my worthless claim. He knew there was something here, something more than burnt timber. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. I had found a treasure, yes, but now I had a secret to protect, and I knew, instinctively, that Barnaby wouldn't stop until he found it too. The journal lay heavy in my lap, its brittle pages whispering secrets I was only just beginning to understand. Pure copper, my grandfather had written, his looping script surprisingly elegant for a prospector. But then right after, unstable sections near the entrance. A chill, colder than the cavern air, traced its way down my spine. The discovery had filled me with a strange mixture of awe and dread. I had found something truly valuable, but also something incredibly dangerous. And the thought of Barnaby Thorne, with his muddy boots and calculating eyes, wouldn't leave me. The first few days were a blur of dust and determination. The cabin, my only refuge, was in a sorry state. Its roof, which sagged like a tired sigh, was my first battle. I found an old tattered tarp folded in a corner, stiff with age and dirt. My hands, usually so careful with paper, were now scraped and sore, smelling of pine resin and old damp wood as I wrestled the heavy canvas over the worst holes. Every time a new gust of wind tried to rip it from my grasp, I gritted my teeth, pulling harder, muttering to myself. It wasn't pretty, but it kept the worst of the cold mountain air and the occasional drip of rain out. A small victory, but it felt monumental. Inside, I swept away decades of dust and debris with a broken broom I found leaning against a wall. The air tasted cleaner, less like old nightmares, more like possibility. I even managed to rig up a crude fireplace using some loose stones and an old metal bucket, coaxing a hesitant flame to life. The warmth on my face, after days of shivering, felt like a hug from an old friend. The crackling fire filled the cabin with dancing shadows and a comforting smell of wood smoke, chasing away some of the gnawing loneliness. Armed with my small flashlight and the journal, I ventured back into the shaft, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind. The sleeping bear indicates the vein's presence, and the dire warnings about certain parts. The journal became my teacher, its faded ink guiding my clumsy hands. It spoke of benchmarks and fissures, words that slowly started to make sense in the dim light. I learned to look for subtle changes in the rock, the way the light played on different textures, listening for the soft crumbling sounds that warned of instability. I didn't try to chip away at the main vein yet. That felt too risky, too big for my trembling hands. Instead, I focused on understanding the mind's structure, following the faint, hand-drawn maps in the journal. It felt like solving a complex puzzle, one that could mean the difference between life and death. I cleared away loose rocks and debris from the safest paths, making small, tentative repairs to the old timbers near the entrance that my grandfather had already shored up. Each time I pulled away a rotting plank or moved a heavy stone, a puff of dust would billow up, making me cough, but also giving me a strange sense of accomplishment. Finally, after days of careful study and cautious work, I found a spot where the copper vein shimmered particularly bright, a dark, rich gold against the gray rock. My grandfather had marked it with a small, almost invisible X in the journal, indicating a stable, accessible outcropping. Following his faded instructions, I used a rusty pickaxe I'd found buried under a pile of rubble outside. The handle was rough in my palm, and my muscles ached with the effort. but I chipped away, carefully, cautiously, feeling the subtle vibrations through my arms. A small piece, no bigger than my thumb, broke free. It was surprisingly heavy, cool and smooth in my hand, glowing softly in the beam of my flashlight. It didn't look like much, but a spark of hope, warm and steady, ignited within me. This wasn't just a rock. It was a promise, a tangible sign that this worthless land might actually hold a future. My resource was working. I emerged from the shaft, blinking in the fading sunlight, the small copper nugget clutched tight in my hand. The air outside was colder now, heavy with the scent of damp earth and distant smoke. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck, a sensation like a cold finger tracing my spine. I scanned the charred trees, the silent, empty landscape. Nothing moved, but the quiet felt different, heavier, as if someone had been holding their breath, watching. A shiver, completely unrelated to the cold, shook me. My prize, my secret, suddenly felt very fragile, very exposed. I knew, deep in my gut, that Barnaby Thorn was closer than I thought. The tiny copper nugget, cool and heavy in my palm, was more than just a piece of rock. It was a flicker of warmth in the cold, desolate landscape of my life. I clutched it tight, feeling the rough edges against my skin, a secret promise. The feeling of being watched, that cold prickle on my neck, still lingered, a nagging buzz in the quiet air. I dismissed it as nerves, exhaustion. I was in the wilderness, after all. Every shadow seemed to hold a pair of eyes. The next morning, a thin, icy mist hung low over the burnt trees, making the world feel even more hushed and watchful. I stepped out of the cabin, my breath pluming in the crisp air, and froze. There, in the damp earth just a few feet from my door, were fresh tire tracks. Deep, muddy ruts. They hadn't been there the night before. My heart gave a little jolt, a cold splash of dread. This wasn't just a stray car. These tracks were wide, heavy, like a truck. And they definitely hadn't come from my bus. The pattern on the tires looked familiar somehow, a thick, aggressive tread. My gaze followed them, past the cabin, down the track towards the main road. They stopped abruptly where the earth got rockier, suggesting the driver had turned around, or maybe had just parked for a while and then left. A knot tightened in my stomach. I hadn't seen anyone, heard anyone, but someone had been here. Close. Too close. I hurried back inside, my hands shaking as I tried to latch the rickety cabin door. That's when I noticed it. The old rusty lock, which had been stiff and hard to push into place, now felt looser. There was a faint, fresh scratch on the wood just around the latch, a small dark line against the grimy surface. Someone had tried to get in. My breath hitched. It wasn't just curiosity, it was an attempt. My meager shelter, my secret, wasn't safe. I spent the rest of the day in a blur of unease, trying to make the cabin more secure. I jammed a fallen branch against the door, piled some heavy rocks against the window. My hands, usually so steady, fumbled with the makeshift barricades. Every creak of the old wood, every rustle of the wind outside, made me jump. I kept glancing at the loose floorboard that hid the shaft, wondering how I could make it blend in better. I pushed some old pans back over it, added a layer of dirt and leaves, trying to make it look undisturbed. Just as the sun began to dip, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples that mimicked the burnt landscape, I heard it. The rumble of an engine, closer this time. My blood ran cold. The sound grew, then a beat-up, dark green truck, splattered with mud, pulled slowly onto the track and stopped just a little way from my cabin. The engine idled, a low, guttural growl. Then the door creaked open, and out stepped Barnaby Thorn. His thick neck, his muddy boots, his eyes that missed nothing. He was exactly as I remembered him from his phone calls, only more unsettling in person. He wore a faded flannel shirt, and a worn baseball cap was pulled low over his eyes, but I could still feel his gaze sweeping over everything. He gave a slow, drawling smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Well now, Elara," he said, his voice like gravel. "Just out for a little drive, thought I'd check on you. Looks like you're settling in, huh? Still planning on selling this fire trap? I could take that burden right off your hands, you know." He gestured vaguely at the charred trees, but his eyes, I noticed, flickered towards the ground near my cabin door, where the tire tracks had been, and then, subtly, towards the general direction of the hidden shaft. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. I tried to sound calm, though my voice felt thin and reedy. "No, Barnaby. I'm fine, just enjoying the quiet." I hugged my arms to my chest, feeling exposed. He chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "Quiet, huh? Some folks find that lonely, and rough terrain, too. Your grandpa, he used to tell all sorts of stories about this place. Old prospectors' tales. Anything interesting pop up, Elara? Any shiny rocks, maybe?" His smile widened just a fraction, a predatory gleam in his eyes. My breath caught. He wasn't just asking, he was fishing. He knew. I saw it in his eyes. A glint of suspicion, a spark of avarice. He didn't just want to buy my worthless land. He wanted what he suspected was hidden beneath it. And I knew, with a certainty that made my hands tremble, that he wouldn't stop until he found my secret. Barnaby Thorne's oily smile, the way his eyes darted toward the cabin and then deeper into the woods, filled me with a cold, clear resolve. He knew. Or at least, he suspected enough to keep coming back. I couldn't fight him with strength. My hands were made for books, not battles. But my grandfather's journal, with its faded warnings, had given me a different kind of weapon. Cleverness. That night, sleep was a restless thing, filled with the echo of Barnaby's gravelly voice. The next morning, I woke before dawn, the air crisp and biting, and knew what I had to do. I pulled on my warmest sweater, feeling the familiar comfort of the soft wool against my skin. But my heart was set on something much harder than comfort. I needed to build a defense, one that would turn his greed into paralyzing fear. I slipped into the mine shaft, the air thick and cool against my face, carrying a roll of thin fishing line I'd found tucked in a rusty toolbox outside. My grandfather's journal, tucked into my pocket, felt like a silent mentor. I carefully reread the section about the unstable sections near the entrance, focusing on his detailed sketches of a particular fissure. It was just beyond the main copper vein, where the rock changed texture, becoming crumbly and weak. My plan was simple, and in my own librarian's way, elegant. I started by meticulously and subtly working on that specific overhead section of rock and timber support that my grandfather had warned about. I used a small, blunt piece of metal, carefully prying and scraping at the old, half-rotten timbers my grandfather had put in place, loosening the stones embedded above them. It was slow, painstaking work. My hands ached, gritty with fine rock dust, but I focused on making it look stable from a casual glance. I wanted Barnaby to walk right under it without a second thought, to feel safe, right until the moment he wasn't. I loosened just enough so that it was teetering, ready to give way with the slightest jostle. Next, directly above this weakened spot, I rigged my delicate tripwire. The fishing line was almost invisible in the dim light, stretched taut across the shaft floor. My fingers, surprisingly deft for such a task, tied it securely to a small hook I hammered into the rock on one side, then pulled it across to a simple, carefully balanced knot on the other. It was barely waist-high, easy for someone to trip over in the near darkness. This tripwire, so delicate, was connected to a heavy canvas bag. I'd found the bag in the cabin, old and mildewed. I filled it with gravel, loose soil, and brittle dead branches I'd gathered from outside, enough to create a loud, impactful crash. The weight of it felt substantial in my hands, and since you've made it this far, go ahead and hit that like button. It really helps me keep bringing stories like this. I then hoisted the bag, grunting with effort, and precariously balanced it on a rickety, almost invisible shelf I built into the rock face directly above the weakened section of the ceiling. A few loose stones held it in place, ready to tumble with the slightest pull of the tripwire. The bag hung there, a silent, weighty promise. I stood back, my heart pounding, and surveyed my work. The shaft looked undisturbed, almost inviting until you knew exactly where to look. The copper vein, a beautiful, rich promise, glimmered deeper inside, drawing the eye past the immediate danger. My trap wasn't meant to hurt Barnaby, just to scare him out of his wits, to convince him that this mine was a collapsing death trap, impossible to exploit. As I climbed out of the shaft, pulling the loose floorboard back into place, a sense of quiet triumph settled over me. My hands still trembled, but not from fear this time. They tingled with purpose. I had done it. My defense, my crumbling truth, was set. I knew Barnaby would be back. I could almost feel his presence, lurking just beyond the edge of the burnt trees. But this time, when he came looking for my secret, he wouldn't find treasure. He would find terror. I took a deep, shaky breath, knowing that soon, very soon, he would learn his lesson. The chill in the cabin still bit at my fingers, but now, a new kind of warmth bloomed in my chest. Barnaby Thorne, with his greedy eyes and muddy boots, had been scared off, at least for a little while. The memory of the loud crash in the shaft, the dust and the creaking timbers, was still fresh in my mind. He hadn't seen the copper vein, just the illusion of a crumbling death trap. That much I was sure of. With the immediate threat seemingly gone, I could finally focus on making this desolate claim truly livable. The mine shaft, with its cool, damp air, became more than just a hidden resource. It started to feel like a true sanctuary. My grandfather's journal, its brittle pages now marked with my own small notes, showed me how to shore up certain sections with more care, how to improve the airflow. It became my constant companion, a quiet, guiding hand. My first task was light. My little keychain flashlight was barely enough. Buried in a forgotten corner of the cabin under a pile of rusted traps, I found 2 old oil lanterns. They were dusty and smelled faintly of ancient kerosene, but with careful cleaning and a stroke of luck finding an old can of lamp oil, they flickered to life, casting a warm, buttery glow that chased away the deepest shadows in the cavern. The air, though still cool, felt less heavy, more breathable with a soft, dancing light. Then came the warmth. The cavern was consistently cool, a steady temperature that kept the air fresh but bit at my bones. I brought down the thickest blankets I owned, salvaged from my suitcase, and laid them on a flat, dry section of rock, making a sort of nest. I even found a small, rusted metal bucket with a lid. Carefully, I would bring a few warm coals from my cabin fire down into the cavern, placing them in the bucket. The lid kept the smoke contained, but a gentle, radiating heat filled my little hideaway, chasing away the chill. The faint scent of wood smoke, so comforting, clung to my clothes. And food. That was a bigger challenge, but my grandfather's journal, in one of its stranger entries, mentioned a small, dry storage alcove, cleverly hidden behind a loose stone. It was dusty and cobweb-filled, but inside, wrapped in heavy canvas, were a few tins of dried beans, some hardtack biscuits, and even a small, tightly sealed bag of coffee beans. Old, yes, but still edible. The first time I brewed that coffee over my small fire bucket, the rich, earthy aroma filled the cavern, tasting like hope. It was a meager supply, but it was enough to keep me from gnawing hunger. My stomach, once a hollow pit, now held the promise of sustenance. Weeks passed. The burnt landscape outside slowly began to heal in its own way, small green shoots pushing through the ash. And inside, I was healing too. The constant physical work, the simple, focused tasks slowly strengthened my librarian's hands. The perpetual soot and dirt still stained them, but beneath it they felt stronger, more capable. My cardigans, though still soft, were now layered over practical shirts, and I moved with a new sense of purpose. My cheeks, once pale, had a touch of color from the mountain air. On one of my rare trips to the nearest small town to trade a tiny, carefully selected piece of copper for some essential supplies at the general store, old Mrs. Henderson, who ran the place, squinted at me over her spectacles. "Well, Hilara Vance," she drawled, her voice a slow rustle, "you look like the mountain air is agreeing with you. You've certainly plumped up a bit, not looking so peaky anymore." She smiled kindly, but her eyes held a hint of surprise, a silent question. I just smiled back, a genuine smile for the first time in a long while, and paid for my flour and a new box of tea. I knew my improving appearance wouldn't go unnoticed for long. The bus driver, always friendly, waved to me with a little more cheer these days. And of course, Barnaby Thorne, for all his bluster, wasn't a man to give up easily. I hadn't seen him since the crumbling truth, but I felt his absence like a held breath. One evening, as the sun dipped below the jagged peaks, painting the skeletal trees in hues of deep violet, I heard it. The low, familiar rumble of a truck. My heart leaped into my throat. This time, it wasn't a drive-by. The engine cut and the distinct heavy thud of a truck door closing echoed through the silent forest. I peered through a crack in my cabin door, my breath catching in my throat. Barnaby Thorne, his silhouette outlined against the darkening sky, stood by his truck, looking towards my cabin. He wasn't smiling this time. His face was grim, unreadable, and his eyes, even from a distance, seemed to bore right through me. He had seen my change, heard the whispers. He knew something was up, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the game was no longer about scaring him off. It was about to become something far more dangerous. Barnaby Thorne, silhouetted against the deepening twilight, stood like a thunderhead. The air grew heavy around us, thick with the scent of damp earth and something unsaid. My heart gave a startled thump. But then, a strange, steady calm settled over me. It was the calm of knowing what was hidden, knowing what awaited him. My hands, once so trembling, felt surprisingly steady as I gripped the rough wooden doorframe. His eyes, even from that distance, seemed to bore right through me, missing nothing. He finally started walking towards the cabin, each heavy bootfall a deliberate crunch on the charred pine needles. He wasn't smiling this time. The grim set of his jaw and the hard line of his mouth told me the pretense of friendly advice was over. "Well, Alara," he said, stopping a few feet from me. His voice no longer a drawl, but sharp, like a stone scraping on rock. "Folks in town are talking. You're looking prosperous. Funny, for a woman living on a worthless, burnt-out claim." He gestured dismissively at the cabin, but his gaze swept past it, lingering on the subtle shift in the earth where the old landslide met the cabin wall, right near the loose floorboard. A tiny, almost imperceptible tremor ran through me, but I kept my face still. "The mountain provides, Barnaby," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "And hard work. It's a fine place for quiet contemplation." I remembered the feel of the cool copper in my hand, the satisfying ache in my muscles from shoring up the timbers. I had worked hard. He let out a short, humorless laugh that scratched at the quiet evening. "Contemplation, huh? Or a hidden vein of something precious? Don't play coy with me, Alara. Your grandpa was a prospector. A bit touched, maybe, but he knew rock. And I know this land. I know there are stories, old whispers about this particular piece of acreage. He took another step closer, his shadow falling over me. I could smell the stale scent of his work clothes, the hint of gasoline and old ambition. I'm offering you one last chance to sell this claim, Ilara. For a fair price, of course, before things get complicated. The words hung in the air, a thinly veiled threat. He wasn't talking about legal papers anymore. His eyes, hard as flint, made that clear. He was talking about simply taking what he believed was his. My mind went to the shaft, to the cleverly placed tripwire, to the strategically loosened rock and the heavy bag of gravel. Every element was exactly where I'd left it. A silent promise waiting to be fulfilled. My calm deepened. "Complicated, Barnaby?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, yet it held a surprising steadiness. "I think things are quite simple, actually. This is my home, my land, and it's not for sale." He scoffed, his face twisting into a sneer. "Your home? You're a city librarian, Ilara. You wouldn't know a valuable rock if it hit you on the head." He took another step, closer still, his imposing figure looming. "But I know, and I'm going to find out what you're hiding, one way or another." He then took a deep breath, his chest expanding, as if steeling himself. His gaze locked onto the area where the subtle outline of the shaft's hidden entrance lay beneath the floorboard, an area he'd likely already scoped out during his earlier clandestine visits. Then, without another word, Barnaby Thorne turned his back on me. He walked towards the cabin door, a determined, heavy step. He pushed past the flimsy branch I'd used as a barricade, his boot hitting the wood with a jarring thud, and reached for the cabin door. His hand closed around the rusty latch, and he pulled. He was going in. He was going to find my secret. Barnaby Thorne's hand, thick and calloused, closed around the rusty latch of my cabin door. My breath caught in my throat, a dry gasp. He pushed past the flimsy branch I'd propped against it, and the old wood groaned in protest. The cabin door swung inward with a mournful creak, swallowing his silhouette. I stood frozen for a moment, my hands gripping the rough wood of the doorframe, my knuckles white. The cold mountain air seemed to hold its breath. Then, silence. Just for a heartbeat, a terrifying, drawn-out quiet where I could hear nothing but the frantic thump of my own heart. I imagined him inside, his eyes sweeping the meager contents of my cabin. Searching, my mind raced, picturing him kicking aside the old pans, then seeing the subtle outline of the loose floorboard I'd so carefully disguised. My chest felt tight, a mix of fear and a strange, cold anticipation. A dull thud echoed from within the cabin, followed by a soft scrape of metal. He must have moved the old pans. Then a distinct creak, the sound of the loose board shifting. My heart leaped. He was finding it. I heard the muffled clatter of something rolling, perhaps a broken tool, as he cleared the opening. Then, a low grunt, and the fainter sounds of movement descending. My grandfather's sturdy, rough-hewn rungs now supporting Barnaby Thorne's weight, taking him down into the cool, damp earth. I could almost feel the cold air wafting up from the shaft, guiding him deeper. I imagined him landing softly in the small cavern, his heavy boots crunching on the loose rock. The faint shimmer of the copper vein would have caught his eye, a greedy gleam in the darkness, drawing him forward like a moth to a flame. He wouldn't be looking for unstable sections, not with that prize in sight. He'd be hurrying, eager to lay his claim. My hands, which had once turned delicate book pages, now felt powerful, connected to every fiber of that hidden space. Then it happened. A sudden, sharp crack, like a twig snapping underfoot, the fishing line tripwire. It was almost drowned out by the immediate, heavier crash that followed. The heavy canvas bag, filled with gravel, loose soil, and brittle branches, had fallen. The sound was immense, booming through the silent mountain, vibrating the very ground beneath my feet. I pictured the bag hitting the rickety shelf, the stones giving way, the contents exploding downwards. A split second later, a deep, guttural groan erupted from beneath the cabin. The strategically loosened section of overhead rock and timber support, disturbed by the sudden impact of the falling bag, gave way. Rocks tumbled, heavy and loud, dust billowed outwards in a suffocating cloud, and the old timbers groaned, a mournful, terrifying sound that mimicked a true collapse. The air in the cabin itself seemed to shift, a gust of displaced, dust-laden air blowing out the open door. A terrified shout, raw with primal fear, tore through the dust. It was Barnaby's voice, but stripped of its bluster, a frantic, desperate sound. I heard a scramble, a violent clatter of boots on rock, then the frantic scrabbling as he clawed his way back up the shaft, propelled by sheer terror. He was not going deeper. He was getting out. The loose floorboard slammed back into place with a desperate, heavy thud. Then, Barnaby Thorne burst from the cabin door, stumbling into the twilight. He was covered from head to foot in a fine gray layer of dust, his clothes grimy, his hair matted, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. His eyes, wide and wild, darted around, unseeing, as he gasped for breath, his chest heaving. He looked like a ghost, a man who had stared into the maw of something terrifying. The cunning, greedy glint in his eyes was replaced by raw, unadulterated fear. He didn't see me standing there, silent witness to his terror. He only saw the collapsing mine, a death trap behind him. He was shaking, utterly exposed, his elaborate facade of confidence crumbling with the mine dust clinging to his skin, making it impossible to deny what he had been doing. Barnaby Thorne, caked in dust and wild-eyed, scrambled backward, tripping over his own muddy feet as he retreated from my cabin. He didn't even glance at me, standing there silently in the doorway. His only thought was escape from the terror he believed he'd just barely survived. The sounds of the crumbling truth, the loud crash, the tumbling rocks, the groaning timbers had done their job perfectly. He stumbled to his beat-up truck, fumbling with the door handle, his hands shaking so hard they clattered against the metal. He threw himself inside, slammed the door shut, and the engine roared to life with an angry cough. Gravel sprayed as he spun the tires, racing down the track, disappearing into the deepening twilight. The sound of his truck faded quickly, leaving behind an even deeper quiet. A long, shaky breath escaped me. My legs, which had felt like jelly moments before, now felt rooted to the spot. The last of the adrenaline began to ebb, leaving me feeling strangely light, almost hollow. My worthless claim, my hidden copper, was safe. Barnaby Thorne, the man with the hungry eyes and the smooth threats, was gone, his greed shattered by a carefully orchestrated terror. He wouldn't be back for the mine. He'd learned his lesson about this particular death trap. The next few days settled into a quiet rhythm. I went about my chores, fixing the cabin door more securely this time, gathering kindling for my little fire. The air felt lighter, no longer heavy with the unspoken threat of Barnaby's return. I even managed to fix a cracked window pane using some heavy plastic sheeting I found, making the cabin feel a little less drafty, a little more like a home. Each small act felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, a librarian finding her footing in a world she never expected to inhabit. Word travels fast in these mountains, even without proper phones. Soon, the general store owner, old Mrs. Henderson, gave me a knowing look when I stopped in for supplies. "Heard Barnaby Thorne had a bit of an accident up at your place, Elara," she drawled, her eyes twinkling over her spectacles. "Said the old mine collapsed right on him. Said he barely got out alive. Called it cursed. Said no one in their right mind should go near it." She paused, then added, Seems to be doing you some good though, dear. You're looking stronger than ever. I just offered her a small, secret smile. The mountain indeed was providing, and so was a librarian's cleverness. With Barnaby gone, the fear of discovery receded, replaced by a quiet sense of ownership and responsibility. I no longer had to hide my activities, not really. I could work on the copper vein, carefully chipping away at its edges, gathering small, manageable pieces. My grandfather's journal, now a treasured companion, continued to guide me. I learned how to process the copper, cleaning it, making it ready for trade. My hands, once delicate with paper, were now strong and sure, stained with the earthy reds and browns of my precious metal. The copper, in small, carefully managed amounts, provided for my needs. It bought flour and coffee, a warmer coat, even a new pair of sturdy boots. I was no longer merely surviving. I was living, thriving in my own quiet way. One crisp afternoon, with the sun casting long golden streaks through the skeletal pines, I found myself at the entrance to the shaft. The loose floorboard was now a familiar entry point, no longer a source of anxiety. The air, cool and damp, still carried the faint scent of deep earth and copper. I leaned down, peering into the comforting darkness, listening to the quiet drip of water somewhere far below. The rich copper vein, my secret, shimmered softly in the gloom, a steady, unwavering promise. It was more than metal. It was my connection to this land, to my grandfather, and to a future I had built with my own hands. I closed my eyes, feeling the gentle pulse of the mountain around me, completely at peace. My small hidden world, deep within the heart of this wild, beautiful land, was finally and truly my own. The mountain air, no longer heavy with the threat of Barnaby Thorn, hummed with a quiet peace. The burnt trees, though still stark, seemed to whisper secrets of resilience, not despair. My hands, once delicate with paper, now felt strong, capable, even when caked with the earthy reds and browns of my copper. Barnaby's frantic retreat, his terror-stricken face, was a memory that still brought a strange satisfaction. He wouldn't be bothering me again. My worthless claim was truly mine. But with this new peace came a different kind of contemplation. My grandfather's journal, its brittle pages filled with looping script, lay open on my crude table. It spoke of the copper, yes, but also of responsibility, of the land's spirit, of taking only what was needed. This wasn't just a hidden resource. It was a trust, a legacy. I was a librarian, a keeper of stories, and now I was a keeper of this deeper secret too. I often thought about what to do, about sharing the secret. There were honest miners, good people in the distant towns, I supposed, but the journal's warnings about unstable sections, the way Barnaby had tried to take it, made me wary. This wasn't just about selling copper. It was about honoring the mountain, honoring my grandfather's silent wisdom. And in my heart, I knew I was the one who understood this specific, fragile place best. The who to trust with the secret for now had to be me. The true legacy, I realized, wasn't just about the copper itself, but what it could do. I pictured the desolate claim, the charred stumps, the skeletal pines. What if the small, carefully extracted pieces of copper could help heal this scarred land? What if they could buy saplings to replant the forest, to bring back the whisper of green? My grandfather's words about the sleeping bear formation, indicating the vein's larger presence, made me feel a connection to something ancient, something that deserved respect and careful stewardship. One afternoon, I walked down into the cool, damp cavern. My oil lantern cast a warm, buttery glow on the rock walls, on the shimmering copper vein. I held the journal, feeling the familiar texture of the leather. This cavern, this secret, had pulled me from utter despair, taught my hands a new kind of strength. It was more than just a mine. It was a sanctuary, a quiet teacher. I found a smooth, flat stone in a dry alcove, near where I'd first discovered the journal. With careful movements, I placed the journal there, giving it a place of honor. I then reached out, touching the cool, solid copper vein, feeling its pulse. My fingers traced its rich, earthy reds and browns, almost a dark gold. It felt alive, a silent promise. I didn't say any words out loud, but in my heart, I made a vow. I would be the guardian of this place. I would respect its power, its fragility. I would take only what was needed, and I would use what I found here to build something good, something green, a quiet testament to healing in a place that had known only fire. This was my legacy, this slow, careful rebuilding, starting with the very earth itself. Standing there in the quiet gloom, a strange peace settled over me, deep and true. I had come to this burnt, empty world with a heart full of despair, my hands shaking with uncertainty. But in the quiet depths of this mountain, amidst the cold rock and the silent copper, I had found not just a hidden treasure, but something far more precious. Myself, capable and strong, finally home. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Your support is what brings these stories to more people. The mountain air, no longer heavy with the threat of Barnaby Thorn, hummed with a quiet peace. The burnt trees, though still stark, seemed to whisper secrets of resilience, not despair. My hands, once delicate with paper, now felt strong, capable, even when caked with the earthy reds and browns of my copper. Barnaby's frantic retreat, his terror-stricken face, was a memory that still brought a strange satisfaction. He wouldn't be bothering me again. My worthless claim was truly mine. But with this new peace came a different kind of contemplation. My grandfather's journal, its brittle pages filled with looping script, lay open on my crude table. It spoke of the copper, yes, but also of responsibility, of the land's spirit, of taking only what was needed. This wasn't just a hidden resource. It was a trust, a legacy. I was a librarian, a keeper of stories, and now I was a keeper of this deeper secret too. I often thought about what to do, about sharing the secret. There were honest miners, good people in the distant towns, I supposed, but the journal's warnings about unstable sections, the way Barnaby had tried to take it, made me wary. This wasn't just about selling copper. It was about honoring the mountain, honoring my grandfather's silent wisdom. And in my heart, I knew I was the one who understood this specific, fragile place best. The who to trust with the secret, for now, had to be me. The true legacy, I realized, wasn't just about the copper itself, but what it could do. I pictured the desolate claim, the charred stumps, the skeletal pines. What if the small, carefully extracted pieces of copper could help heal this scarred land? What if they could buy saplings to replant the forest, to bring back the whisper of green? My grandfather's words about the sleeping bear formation, indicating the vein's larger presence, made me feel a connection to something ancient, something that deserved respect and careful stewardship. One afternoon, I walked down into the cool, damp cavern. My oil lantern cast a warm, buttery glow on the rock walls, on the shimmering copper vein. I held the journal, feeling the familiar texture of the leather. This cavern, this secret, had pulled me from utter despair, taught my hands a new kind of strength. It was more than just a mine. It was a sanctuary, a quiet teacher. I found a smooth, flat stone in a dry alcove, near where I'd first discovered the journal. With careful movements, I placed the journal there, giving it a place of honor. I then reached out, touching the cool, solid copper vein, feeling its pulse. My fingers traced its rich, earthy reds and browns, Almost a dark gold. It felt alive, a silent promise. I didn't say any words out loud, but in my heart, I made a vow. I would be the guardian of this place. I would respect its power, its fragility. I would take only what was needed, and I would use what I found here to build something good, something green, a quiet testament to healing in a place that had known only fire. This was my legacy. This slow, careful rebuilding, starting with the very earth itself. Standing there in the quiet gloom, a strange peace settled over me, deep and true. I had come to this burnt, empty world with a heart full of despair, my hands shaking with uncertainty. But in the quiet depths of this mountain, amidst the cold rock and the silent copper, I had found not just a hidden treasure, but something far more precious. Myself, capable and strong, finally home. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Your support is what brings these stories to more people.